AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP, was founded by activist and playwright Larry Kramer, who during a rousing speech at New York City's LGBT Center on March 12, 1987, posed a question to his audience. Do we want to start a new organization devoted to political action? The answer was a resounding yes. 2 days later, in the basement of the same center that still stands today at West 13th Street and 7th Avenue, ACT UP was formed. ACT UP remains committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis through policy and social reform. While the Gay Liberation Front had called for visibility and broad societal revolution, ACT UP focused on a single life or death issue, the AIDS crisis. ACT UP grew out of Kramer's frustration with another prominent AIDS activism group, Gay Men's Health Crisis, for their focus on care for the dying rather than strategies to keep the living alive. In October of 1987, inspired by ACT UP's new approach to radical, direct action at the Second National March for Lesbian and Gay Rights in Washington, D.C., other participants returned home to cities such as Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C., among others, to form the local ACT UP chapters. Separate AIDS activism movements formed internationally, which were inspired by, though not associated with, the American ACT UP. ACT UP was effectively leaderless, though Kramer remained a prominent voice in the movement. The leaders of ACT UP ended up being those who showed up to meetings most frequently, joined committees, and could communicate and defend their ideas the best. Initially, ACT UP formed 3 primary committees: the Issues Committee, the Actions Committee, and the Coordinating Committee, whose proposals would then be set to a vote by the present ACT UP members. Additional committees were added to cover topics such as finance, outreach, treatment and data, media, graphics, and housing. To address the diverse needs of its membership, ACT UP members formed caucuses for specific groups, such as the Women's Caucus and the Latino-Latina Caucus. Affinity groups were also formed, which centered on specific advocacy and personal issues, such as the IV Drug User Affinity Group and the Actions Committee, focusing on needle exchanges. ACT UP shifted power back into the people's hands by challenging those in positions at the Centers for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health, and federal and city political offices with disruptive and overtly visible change tactics. Members were fueled by 2 powerful emotions, grief and anger, and used their lived experiences to evoke change and identified opposition. Part of the success of the movement comes from the fact that many members had HIV and/or were terminally ill with AIDS. So what did they have to lose in their participation besides their own life, which was doomed to end soon anyway, thanks to the inaction of those in power? The extent of digital organizing in the early days of ACT UP was via phone call and news coverage, which was anything accessible at the time to get their message visible. The movement's success can be traced to its on-the-ground organizing and word-of-mouth publicization of actions. Information was distributed where members were likely to be, at bars, clubs, street corners in the city's gay neighborhoods, health centers, and word of mouth with friends and chosen family. And I cannot underscore the importance of human relationships in organizing the social change movement. The personal became political when the government ignored the needs of the ones that members loved the most. ACT UP employed multiple social change strategies, namely direct action, political advocacy, mutual aid, and art. In October of 1988, ACT UP had one of its most successful demonstrations when it shut down the Food and Drug Administration for a day. Activists blocked doors, walkways, and entrance roads as FDA workers reported to work. Police told some workers to go home rather than wade through the crowd of an estimated 1,500 protesters who were holding a black banner that read, Federal Death Administration, which was in reference to the FDA's slow, arduous AIDS drug approval and distribution process that left hundreds of individuals dead, waiting for treatment. Among the protesters was artist David Wojnarowicz, then HIV/AIDS positive, wearing a painted jean jacket that read, If I die of AIDS, forget burial. Just drop my body on the steps of the FDA. ACT UP presented precise demands for changes that would make experimental drugs available more quickly and more fairly. While the causes of HIV transmission, like unprotected vaginal or anal sex, were similar among both men and women, the symptoms of the virus varied greatly. ACT UP's Women's Caucus targeted the CDC for its narrow definition of what constituted HIV and AIDS. According to historian Jennifer Breyer, for men, full-blown AIDS often caused Kaposi sarcoma, while women experienced bacterial pneumonia, pelvic inflammatory disease, and cervical cancer. In October of 1990, attorney Teresa McGovern filed a suit representing 19 New Yorkers who claimed they were unfairly denied disability benefits because of the CDC's narrow definition of AIDS. At a protest to raise attention for McGovern's lawsuit, 200 ACT UP protesters gathered in Washington and chanted, "How many more have to die before you say they qualify?" and carried posters with the tagline, "Women don't get AIDS, they just die from it." 6 months later, the Clinton administration revised federal criteria for evaluating HIV status and made it easier for women with AIDS to secure Social Security benefits. Mutual aid was a cornerstone of ACT UP's movement as members created their own support networks for those terminally ill with AIDS, organized needle exchanges, collected unused medications after individuals' passings, and distributed condoms at bars, clubs, and bathhouses. ACT UP is best known for their protest art. Grand Fury was an anonymous art collective that sought to bring an end to the AIDS crisis by making reference to the issues plaguing society at large, especially homophobia and the lack of public investment in the AIDS epidemic. The group often faced censorship in their proceedings, including being rejected for public billboard space and being threatened with censorship in art exhibitions. When faced with this censorship, Grand Fury often posted their work illegally on the walls of the streets. Anonymity was key to Grand Fury's success so as to maintain focus on the issues being addressed and protect the artist from arrest, which would only serve to hold back the mission of the collective. Overall, ACT UP strategies were incredibly effective in the ways they were able to raise awareness, create tangible social change, and use art and human bodies to further the cause. ACT UP was successful in organizing chapters across the major U.S. cities in which AIDS was a particular concern, though uniting the movement across these cities and reaching non-urban areas presented its own challenge. The mutual aid efforts of ACT UP members underscore the importance of human relationships and direct resources in creating social change. ACT UP's main challenge was garnering support from other activist groups, given their radical, often militant, though nonviolent, tactics to demand change. Unification and solidarity were integral to the queer rights movement for decades prior, and yet this is where ACT UP struggled the most. While primarily nonviolent, ACT UP protests and demonstrations did have the potential for police violence and arrest, and at times illegal action to get their message across. ACT UP was so singular in their approach that the risk for institutional absorption was incredibly low. If anything, it was their insistence on working separately from and criticizing movements such as GMHC and the NAMES Project that hindered the movement. Compromising the strategies and vision of the organization to please another movement was in direct opposition to ACT UP's founding values. ACT UP protected themselves so fiercely from co-optation that they missed out on opportunities to fight in solidarity with other organizations to expand their reach. Infighting and decentralized leadership ultimately led to ACT UP's downfall. As needs of individuals living with HIV and AIDS change, expanding action efforts to HIV prevention, such as with PrEP and PEP access, and other health concerns of aging HIV-positive individuals, can further justice for people living with HIV and AIDS. The HIV epidemic still isn't over. ACT UP can further social change by organizing new chapters, committees, and actions focused on minoritized groups, such as Black gay men in the South and undocumented transgender Latina women in Los Angeles. Overall, ACT UP aligns with the social work profession's values of service, social justice, and dignity and worth of the person. Service was a key tenet of ACT UP's approach with their ongoing mutual aid efforts and providing direct support resources to individuals with HIV and AIDS. Social justice is at the core of ACT UP's mission to challenge those in power, give voice to those in minoritized groups, and ultimately reach a state of equity for anyone living with HIV and AIDS. ACT UP would not exist if it weren't for the failure of city, state, and federal governments to recognize the inherent dignity and worth of people with HIV and AIDS. ACT UP's use of human bodies at demonstrations and the bold messaging of Grand Fury's public art brought visibility and humanity where those in power had only brought ignorance and fear.